And got a couple of issues here. Welcome. All right, a lot of new faces at the table. Who's who and what's what. So, Mr. Van Ark, welcome. Thank you.
Afternoon.
You want to introduce the folks you brought with you, please? And yourself, for that matter.
So, yeah, Roelof Van Ark, CEO of California High Speed Rail. And I have two of our board members here, Mr. Tom Umberg, as the authority board member, Mr. Bob Belganoth, also authority board member, and I think you met Danae Eshoo last time from the AG's office, responsible for our CEQA and environmental issues.
All right. We have, let me tell you first my goal, but then I understand there's some other issues that have popped up that we want to make sure we cover. And in fact, I think as a courtesy to members, I want to cover their issues before we get to my issues, if that's okay with them. And Mr. Van Ark, the issue that is on the chair's mind today is a follow-up conversation to the one that we had last week, which I actually thought was a very helpful conversation, and I appreciate the fact that we were able to make some progress. I can't say that we maybe changed a lot of minds about what direction the project ought to head in that conversation, but I think we at least got some facts on the table that will facilitate a conversation. Before we go back to that conversation, however, I understand that both Senator Lowenthal and Senator Fuller have some issues and some questions. And the one thing I want to say is just to be fair to you and your team, if these are issues that have not been surfaced previously, then I think we'll understand if the answer to the question is can't answer today, but we'll get back to you next week. If there is a possible response today, of course, that would be helpful and appreciated. And Mr. Umberg, thank you for your work on the authority. And Mr. Balganorth, congratulations. Even as I question your judgment in applying, I applaud your courage in taking the challenge on. So good for you. Shall we begin with Senator Lowenthal? Senator Lowenthal, you have some issues and questions you want to raise?
Yeah, this came to me, this issue from Senator Yee, and Senator Yee has asked me, was very much concerned about why the Transbay Terminal in San Francisco, the construction of that has been relegated to a distant future, and there's been a proposal to construct an interim terminal, I believe, at 4th and King Street, several blocks from the San Francisco's business district. Prop 1A was very clear in stating that the Transbay Terminal is the termination of the high-speed rail project. The funding already has, much of it has begun on the Transbay Terminal for the construction. Does that mean that we're going to have to pay twice now for terminals in San Francisco? Is this going to be an additional cost to the state? And can you tell us why we're moving in this direction, and what's been the communication with the folks from San Francisco? We just keep hearing from them that they're not sure of what's going on there and why we're doing two terminals rather than one.
Yes, Chairman, members, senators. I can give you some answers. We just had this topic in the board meeting as well, to some extent. We were asked the same questions. And it is very clear that Transbay Terminal remains Prop 1A's station of the future. There's no question about that. You had requested us to look at a blended system. And we had, as you know, been working on a thing called phased implementation, although I add that our phased implementation launch was very young. It's new. We, in fact, had that meeting today in our board meeting, so it is something that we just brought on the table. So all in all, both your system, blended system, if I can call it your system, and our system of phased implementation, which I mentioned to you before, have got some...
I just want to say I'm looking forward to the day we can call it our system.
Yeah, exactly. So am I. So it's got some similarities. But if I can give you just as an example, maybe the first phase of a implementation on the peninsula may cost you, say, $1 billion or $2 billion. But the last 1.5 miles to get from what is today an existing station, it's an existing station for Caltrain at 4th and King, to Transbay Terminal requires a very specific tunnel, a very big and expensive tunnel. Now that tunnel, the estimates that Transbay Terminal had for that before was that that would cost about $2.5 billion. So obviously if you're going to go for, it was all about saving money and the economics of the things and so on. So if the tunnel is going to be available, it is definitely going to be part of the solution. We still want to get to Transbay Terminal, no question about it. It's just which one of the phases is it to get there?
How much extra money, though, will it be to make the terminal at 4th and King Street appropriate and will for high-speed rail?
Yeah.
And now to use that only for a limited period of time, while already the Transbay Terminal will be completed, I think, before this is even completed. So we're going to have a Transbay Terminal that's completed. That's part of the 1A bond. Now we're only going to the King and 4th Street, which is only temporary, and we have to upgrade that. What are all these costs?
We didn't have the figure, Senator, and it's part of the investigation that we wanted to do to come up with those type of figures. But again, it will be a fraction of the $2.5 billion to put a station there. But that's what we had put forward to our board today, saying we want to look at this in a phased manner. And a phase can be a phase, as we have explained sometimes, vertically, or it can be a phase in the length of the track. So you can do a portion of the track, and that can be a phase. And this could be a phase as well. But it is definitely quite an expensive phase, that last portion.
I understand.
For the reason that it is a very expensive tunnel that has to be built. If, for reasons that, we can get the funding, or we together can get the funding, and we can make that happen, we're quite happy to go into Transbay Terminal. It remains our aim to get there, no question about it.
Has this all been, I'm just hearing, again, this is not my part of the state, but I'm hearing real concern that, and that possibly may be in terms of what kinds of outreach has been done and how, but I am hearing from folks in San Francisco more questions than is this a change in commitment? Why are we doing this? Why aren't we following what the bond said? And so I just advise, that as, and I'm sure you're dealing with it, but that
Senator, as we discussed at the last hearing, we said we have to meet Prop 1A.
Right.
Prop 1A is Transbay Terminal.
That is to Transbay Terminal.
It's just a matter of phasing, funding when you get there, and we're going to have to put forward to our board recommendations sometime in the future. But we want to get there. I've told the CEO of Transbay Terminal exactly the same. It hasn't changed that at all. It's purely a phasing issue. What do you do when you get money? What should you do first? And what do you do logically so that you can get, a system up and running with sufficient capacity to make high-speed rail operate in that corridor?
Any time frame on how long this would go forth in terms of your planning, in terms of the funding that will or could be available? Are we talking about a delay to Transbay of months, years, many years?
No, I don't think this is not delaying Transbay.
Well, I'm not. Transbay is moving forward. So
yes.
We have Transbay moving forward and the high-speed rail moving forward from the peninsula up to, but we're stopping now. There's going to be a gap, and I'm just wondering what's the plan? And where is that in the priorities? And
Senator, the question, is really when we get the next $1, $2, $3 billion. I mean, the first questions we have to ask ourselves
would that be the first use of
are we going to go south or north?
Right.
We could well be going into Los Angeles with the first money.
Okay.
And, these are decisions that are being planned.
Then Los Angeles will get in touch with us and asking us what's going on. I understand.
This will be in the business plan as we recommend.
But this is, we need to kind of understand what the plan is and where it's going and what it all means, because it's the uncertainty and the feelings that have things changed, and where is everything? And I think that's just is up in the air.
In our board meeting today, we reconfirmed to the people that were there from the mayor's office, the locals from Transbay Terminal, reconfirmed Transbay Terminal is part of the solution, doesn't change. It's part of Prop 1.
I remember in the
Part
drafting
of
of the bond.
Prop 1A, as we had agreed, we have to be according to Prop 1A, according to the law. And
Right.
it's just a matter of phasing.
Right.
So that is typically one where we, in our planning, cannot drop Transbay Terminal out of the planning.
Because I remember we could not get that bond, that 3034
Exactly.
out without the Transbay Terminal in, and we had to put that specifically
And those are
in
the-
at that time. And so now people are going to feel that, you know, what's going on. And so
That's why we are saying all the time, we have to know, sorry if I push it a bit there, but we have to know the end solution, the solution that we have to go to, like getting to Transbay Terminal, and then we have to put phases in front of it that get us there, because we have to get there to meet Prop 1A.
Well, this just gets me back to the same issue that I keep coming. I need to see a financial plan and where the money is coming from. We have all these different component parts that were not funded. I asked you the last time, what does it mean if there's a reduction in federal funds that are coming? You indicated to this body that every high-speed rail project throughout the world has not been built without strong federal involvement.
Yep.
We're not clear where that is. You're now making decisions, and we just don't know where that funding is coming from and what commitments are there. And so it just leaves us very uneasy, indicating that this communication has to continue, because we are very concerned about the overall funding.
Senator Fuller.
I think you'll find a similar theme today of stakeholder concern, lack of consultation, and lack of a financial plan. After receiving word an hour before the subcommittee last week that the Commission was talking about the possibility of an I-5 corridor realignment from Bakersfield to LA, I made the point of asking the Commission to brief the affected members of the legislature about any such plans. And now this morning, an hour before the committee began, I received word that the Commission has voted to spend $700,000 for a conceptual study of this alignment. I've also heard from stakeholders who have not been contacted about this realignment proposal. In other words, since I ask about this, the roar is continuing to get louder, not lesser, and more legislators in my area have been approaching, and they seem to lack detail. And it just seems like, you know, most people sort of felt that the routes were, I mean, they've been the same for kind of a long time and going different direction. Through like the Lancaster area now, suddenly it's changed and nobody really understands the plan, and this $700,000, we're not really sure where the money's coming from. So I'm going to come back to that question, but has the Commission made any attempt to brief the impacted members of the legislature on the realignment plan?
Senator, this is one of those difficult things, and the reason we went to the board today was to get their approval that we can more openly go out and speak to various people about this alternative. What happened in the last years since the alignment through the Antelope Valley was pre-selected was that that particular alignment became more and more cumbersome to build. The conditions that were the driving conditions at the time to choose the Antelope Valley today have to be looked at again. The amount of tunneling has doubled compared to what was originally expected. The problem with seismic faults has increased drastically because the problem is one tries to approach seismic faults outside of tunnels, because if they're inside tunnels, it causes a big problem if there should ever be a seismic movement. And you have to rebuild the tunnel completely, so you have to redesign. You have to design tunnels more or less to compensate for seismic movements. So the whole Antelope Valley alternative has become more and more cumbersome and problematic. I was brought on to this project to investigate and look at where there are better possibilities to do things on this particular project. And I then had a relook, or we had a relook in a smaller team, and we found that the grapevine alternative most likely is going to save us a huge amount of money and give us some advantages which were common and known before. It is a 25 miles shorter. Some people challenge it's a 40 miles shorter distance. We worked it out as 25 miles shorter. And it is clearly in the billions of dollars of, most likely in the billions of dollars of saving if we can go through there. It cuts off somewhere in the magnitude of 7 to 9 minutes in travel time. So there are a lot of advantages that we could get going through there. But I can't speak to too many people about these alternatives without getting the approval of my board. And that is the problem. And we did do, and I already apologized to you the last time, I told you that we did do some quiet outreach to certain people, and obviously we didn't go and do it well enough and didn't connect with everybody that we should have connected with. But today's request was to our board to do a conceptual study in the next months only to see whether that alignment, because there had been studies done in the past, and to pick up those old studies and see whether we can find that alignment that does go through there, now speaking to those stakeholders and our partners there, and to then see whether it is possible to make that alignment happen. We must also not forget we were struggling to find a solution through the Antelope Valley. We were getting a tremendous amount of opposition. At the end of the day, I'm given the job to build a high-speed rail line between Northern California and Southern California. And if there is no alignment in a certain area, or if we believe that that could happen, that's not a good solution. So I have to find alternatives and make those happen. We're seeing this as a possible alternative, and our board today approved that for the next months we would be working on a conceptual study only, and then we would come back to the board, at which time we will be able to give them and everybody else a lot more information. But again, because we didn't want to and didn't feel it was right to speak to all types of stakeholders without getting the approval of our board, we first had to go through the round today.
Let me just say that my issue is really not so much engineering solutions, although the whole seismic issue, if we want to debate that, I was there during the earthquake, and believe me, it was far worse across the Ridge Crowd than it was in the Antelope Valley. I lived in Antelope Valley. So that wouldn't be necessarily a publicly generic, acceptable explanation. But beyond that, the engineering solutions is not really what I'm trying to get after. It's the stakeholder opposition. We're very strapped financially in the state, and we're very strapped financially on what we can do about funding this issue, and every dollar counts. And so while we commend you for trying to find whatever routes and whatever solutions that are going to be cost-effective for us, we also need you to realize that stakeholder opposition or support makes a huge difference, and that it's very, relatively speaking, very, very inexpensive to do stakeholder outreach for the purpose of their input, for the purpose of them providing you with data that you start with. It's a preliminary feasibility study, and I'm afraid that that's not happening. So I'm at the stage where, you know, I'd like to ask you where the $700,000 is coming. I still want that answer, but I'm starting to feel very reluctant to authorize those kinds of expenditures until we have some very well-founded stakeholder input program with a list that they come up with the obstacles and support. Because I think there will be support if there is outreach, but there will also be obstacles. And I think that spending money to get to a place where you're just convincing everybody that the engineering solution is correct is only going to get us in a deeper hole. I think we have to go the other way. And so where is the funding for the conceptual study coming from?
Could I interrupt with just a brief, to try and help guide this conversation? I think, Senator Fuller, you've raised two questions, or at least two questions. One is where's the $700,000 come from? The other is the effort at, we'll call it stakeholder outreach, for lack of another phrase. And Mr. Van Ark and to your team, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but my recollection from previous hearings is that there's an overall, in addition to your authority members and your staff, there's a master contract with your principal consultant on the project of about $199 million. Am I remembering that correctly? Does that sound about right?
Correct.
And then about $8 million for oversight, so that you've got essentially a consulting team that can help you provide oversight to the administration of that $199 million. The LAO is
Correct.
nodding. Thank you. And then about $9 million in a separate contract for public relations and community outreach.
Right.
So I think the first question that is raised by Senator Fuller is, so where's that $700,000 coming from? And I would just add to that question, is it coming out of that $199,000 master contract, or is it coming from somewhere else? Say again?
199 million.
Million. What did I say? Thousand. Thank you. Could have been worse. I could have said billion, Mr. Van Ark. So there you go. Is it coming out of that $199 million contract, or is it coming from somewhere else? And then as to the outreach effort, I just want to share the concern without, frankly, any knowledge about what's happening in the part of the state that Senator Fuller is discussing. You know, my pitch to the authority in the past has been sometimes you have to go slow before you can go fast. And I understand your desire to move forward on the project on a number of fronts, to access available funds, to provide jobs sooner rather than later, to make sure the construction costs don't go up. But sometimes when you short-circuit process, you save 3 months and then cost yourself a year or two, if not more. So first question is, on the issue of the $700,000, where is that money coming from? Second question is, what are your thoughts these days about how to provide outreach that works for communities, including the one that Ms. Fuller has described?
So the $700,000, yes, it comes out of the budget, and it comes out of the figures, although not necessarily the ones you mentioned. There are more groups involved. There are what we call the regional consultants. They do the regional work, so some of the money would be spent with the regional consultants, but they're also within a budget. So it comes out of those budgeted amounts of the consultants.
So to the extent that the legislature has authorized funding allocations out of the bond in the past 2 years, some of those funds are to be accessed for this $700,000, and some portion of that may or may not be in the master contract for $199 million, but some other portion of that $700,000 will come from previously made allocations that were in the past 2 years of budget allocations.
Correct, of which 50% is ERA funded and 50% is bond funded.
Senator Fuller, does that answer the question?
Yes, that does. Thank you.
And I would just like to repeat again, the type of savings we're looking at, and this is what we'll look at, and that is we're looking at billions of possible dollars of savings. And this we can only establish by doing this extra work and the outreach, by the way. But we're talking about big numbers. In other words, if you cut 25 miles of track out of an alignment, and you take, say, average of $50 million, or $60 million, that's just an at-grade kind of cost. You know, you're starting to talk billions. So we're talking billions of savings, not just $1 million of saving.
In a minute,
otherwise it wouldn't make too much sense.
Excuse me. In a minute, I'm about to try and help you save some extra billions. But
Thank
before
you.
we get there, Senator Fuller, please pursue this outreach issue just a little bit more. I do want you to have some sense after today's hearing about what the outreach is likely to be like going forward from this point on. Are there things, Mr. Van Ark, that you can share with us about how you might upgrade the outreach effort in this area going forward? Senator Fuller, are there things you'd like to ask for specifically in that way?
Well, specifically, I'd just like to ask for, I know that you have worked a little with Senator Runner's office, and I would like she and I and Senator Rubio to be fully informed on the issue, and I would appreciate hearing your plans for what outreach you have planned, because, from my point of view, there are some existing problems in the area that if they aren't reviewed ahead of time, that they could be substantially become a time obstacle. And in California, how long you have to wait to get things approved can be very, very big, as often as an engineering problem.
We will keep contact with you and also the other senators that have requested that. But not just that. We've had some of the real estate companies, in particular the one big one, in our offices already. We've had meetings with them. We've reached out to them. We've asked them for a list of people that we should be communicating with as well. And they were at our meetings yesterday and today. And we continue to, we want to work with them in these next few months and see whether we can come up with this conceptual system and then go back to the board.
Senator Fuller, it might be, let me offer an observation and then a suggestion if it works for you. The observation is, I think one of the challenges, Mr. Van Ark, that you and your team have is that the issues attendant to your effort are different in different parts of the state. So, and frankly, the outreach, both challenges and opportunities, are different in different parts of the state. So what is happening in the way of engagement on the peninsula that I represent is, I think, different than in parts of Southern California. My observation, just sort of, off the cuff, is that in my area that interest was generated from sort of a grassroots, organic community basis. That in Southern California, that it was more a question of local government officials who said, hang on just a second, we've got to figure out how all this works and comes together. I'm guessing that your area has a different set of issues and a different set of stakeholders. Would it be possible, since we do have this contract in place that is geared towards public relations, to come back to the subcommittee and Senator Fuller and her colleagues who are most interested in this area with a written description of what the outreach plan looks like going forward sometime in the next 2 to 4 weeks? I don't know how long it would take to pull that together. But I think that would be both a benefit to her and her region, but also to the extent that her folks in her region can critique that for you and provide some constructive criticism and suggestions, then it will help make sure that the outreach plan going forward is one that really works for you. And this is just my advice. If I were you, I'd want to be able to say, you know what, we ran that by folks, and they said, yeah, that's the kind of plan we need for outreach, and I think that will give you a little protective cover 2-6 months down the road. Is that a request that's, Senator Fuller, I don't mean to make the request for you. I'm just trying to make sure
that would be very helpful, because I think the main thing for me is, before going forward, I would like to be able to know what the stakeholders believe are the largest obstacles as well as the opportunities before I spend more money on a feasibility plan. This would give us a preliminary feasibility plan that's much less expensive and help us move forward. Thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you. Mr. Van Ark, what do you think is a reasonable time frame to ask folks to come back with a plan? And if you want to consult with, I see you got some of your staff and consulting team here. If you want to consult with them for a minute?
So, Senator, in 4 weeks' time, we'll be able to have that with you. And
great, thank you. Anything else, Senator Fuller, on your issues? All right, then we can ask you to reorient your thinking now to the San Francisco Peninsula and South Bay in our area. I want to go back to the conversation we had last week, Mr. Van Ark. As I said earlier, I thought it was a very helpful conversation on a couple of fronts. And I want to recap what I heard there, and if we need to correct or clarify anything, please feel free to do that. I referenced at that time a joint statement that was issued on April the 18th by Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, who represents the 14th Congressional District in my area, and Assemblymember Rich Gordon, who represents the 21st Assembly District in my area, and myself. And the three of us issued a statement that said basically what we were hoping to see between San Jose and San Francisco was what we refer to as a blended system that integrates high-speed rail with a 21st century Caltrain. And that three elements that we saw as part of that were to avoid a viaduct up and down the corridor and to stay within the existing Caltrain right-of-way. And my recollection is that you indicated at our hearing previously that those were doable things.
Sorry, no, I didn't say that.
Well, I've got tape from the last hearing, and we'll pull out the quotes from the last hearing if you like for a subsequent meeting. But why don't I let you try and clarify what you did or didn't say at the last hearing?
The reason I say that, Senator, is because, you know, I can only go by the designs I know because I'm an engineer. There are on parts of the peninsula, that need viaducts. There are many parts of the peninsula where the cities want viaducts. And therefore, as much as you may refer to a part of the peninsula that may not need viaducts or would not like viaducts, there are parts of the peninsula where the cities and where the solution is a viaduct in accordance with the wishes of the cities.
Well, in an effort to try and find some common ground with you, I will go back and we will pull out the quotes from the previous hearing, and we'll share those with you, and we'll have those at the next hearing of the committee when we hope to have you back again. But to be clear, where you've got local communities who want you to pursue viaducts, I don't have a problem with that. I think the concern that I would have is when the authority is effectively imposing an aerial solution, a 60-foot tall viaduct up and down the corridor on communities that don't want those. So I think, just to be clear, I'm not particularly anxious about communities that have, in effect, requested or desire an aerial solution where both they and you think that's appropriate. That is obviously quite different, in my view, from a situation where a viaduct is imposed. I won't, revisit those two issues. You have a different recollection than I do, and I'll go back and pull the tape. As long as we're on the issue of recollection, I just want to be clear. I didn't hear anyone at the last hearing propose running a single train compliant with Prop 1A up and down the corridor. Did you hear anyone propose that?
I think that was in discussion, Senator.
Well, then let me help clarify that. And again, if need be, we can go back and pull it out. I raised as the third point, after viaducts and right-of-way, the portion of the statement that Congresswoman Eshoo and Assemblymember Gordon and I raised was that we believe that it would be wise for the authority to set aside an environmental impact report for what you call full build-out of a phased project between San Jose and San Francisco. And your response was, well, we need to do that phased, we need to do that EIR for the full phased build-out of the project if, in fact, that's the project. And to which I then said, well, but we don't have to do an EIR if you scale the project back. And your legal counsel, who was with you then and who was with you today from the Attorney General's office, acknowledged that if, in fact, the project was scaled back, that you only have to do an EIR for the project you propose to build, not for a project you don't propose to build. And that seems common sense, but it was the subject of quite a bit of debate. Now, Ms. Aitchison, would you like to weigh in on that?
Yes, thank you, Senator, very much. Danae Aitchison from the Attorney General's office. My recollection of what I said, which I'm sure is on that tape, is the clarification that that would be possible for the authority if whatever that proposal was in compliance with Proposition 1A.
Excellent
That's
point,
the ticket.
because that's what then got us to the conversation about what complies with Prop 1A. And you then, Mr. Van Ark, talked about what it takes to comply with Prop 1A, and there were a couple of issues. One of the issues was, can you make it from San Jose to San Francisco in 30 minutes or less? And you did indicate at that time, and I just want to make sure, since we seem to have some different recollections here about what got said, that a train could make it in that corridor in 30 minutes or less within the first phase of your phased build-out plan.
Although I did mention to you at the hearing that a lot of construction would have to be done in that corridor, but you can build a line in that corridor and then run a train in that line within 30 minutes. But it needs a lot of construction and a lot of billions of dollars.
Absolutely.
If you recall, I talked about tunnels that have to be changed, bridges that have to be changed. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to make that happen.
I think that may be some new caveats, but again, we'll go back and look at the tape and bring those quotes back for discussion in a subsequent meeting. Because it was at that point that you were insisting that we needed to get a train to San Francisco, and we started to talk about 2-track versus 4-track. I'm not sure we used that language. But you said that without going to the full phased build-out of 4 tracks, that we could, in fact, get a train from San Jose to San Francisco within the 30 minutes. And I remember we specifically talked about the fact that we were talking about speeds at roughly 120 to 125 miles an hour. And, you know, we did some simple math over 50 miles and figured out that that could happen within 30 minutes. And then you kept pressing that before we could scale back the project, subject to your legal counsel's admonition that we had to do an EIR for a project that was Prop 1A compliant. And so the question I asked you at the time was, if it has to be Prop 1A compliant, does a single train at the middle of the night make it Prop 1A compliant? Because you were giving me essentially a legal argument, and I was responding with a legal argument, which is, if you can do that, then you're Prop 1A compliant, and you indicated, yes, you are. And then your counsel indicated if that's Prop 1A compliant, then the EIR only has to be sufficient. Ms. Aitchison, do you want to have a different recollection at this point?
I'd just like to make...
Please use the button.
I'd just like to make one point of clarification, which is I do recall Mr. Van Ark pointing out that under the design characteristics in Proposition 1A, the 30-minute time requirement is one of several. And so that was a discussion regarding the time requirement in those design characteristics in the statute. Not all of the requirements in the statute. Okay,
but let's revisit. So let's make a couple things clear. First, no one at that hearing or at this hearing that I've heard from is proposing a single train as the ultimate desirable goal. The issue arose in the context of Prop 1A compliance and in response to a legal argument. So you got a legal argument back. But we are clear, and you acknowledged at the last meeting, that a single train is sufficient. And you also made it clear that in your judgment, ultimate build-out would require additional capacity based on the additional ridership projections that you've produced. I heard all that. Ms. Aitchison, anything you want to clarify or correct at this point? I want to give you every opportunity, folks.
If I may, I'd also like to again state that that was with respect to that single design characteristic requirement in the statute, not all of them that are in the statute. And that was the focus of the discussion based on my best recollection.
All right. Well, let me read to you from an article in the San Francisco Chronicle dated Tuesday, May 3rd. It's an Associated Press report, and it says, reported Monday that it would cost, the San Jose Mercury News reported, so we have an Associated Press article in the San Francisco Chronicle quoting the San Jose Mercury News, just to make it interesting. The San Jose Mercury News reported Monday that it would cost $1.5 billion to electrify 2 existing Caltrain tracks instead of $6.1 billion to build 4 tracks between San Francisco and San Jose. Is that an accurate ballpark figure in your judgment?
I don't know where the figures come from. I would say rough magnitudes, most probably there's some correctness in them, but we do not have figures that accurate in any case.
All right. And then it said, California High-Speed Rail Authority officials said the 2-track plan also would allow them to get the bullet trains moving to at least some parts of the state more quickly, perhaps by the end of the decade, while they secure more for the $43 billion overall project. Does that sound accurate to you?
The whole idea of phased implementation that we have just launched with our board is exactly that, to try and get trains that are going to be running on the backbone of the high-speed rail system up and into San Francisco as soon as we can get them there.
Okay.
And due to the possibility of not getting all the funding at the same time, to phase the implementation. And so, therefore, yes, that would be correct.
Okay. And here's the key question. So take all the time you need to think this one through so we don't have any confusion about it the next time we meet. So you have a first phase that's in the $1.5 billion realm, and I'm going to even say plus or minus $500 million just to try and keep it easy for you. Is that first phase Prop 1A compliant as you envision it?
No.
And why not? Because those then are the challenges that I want us to focus on.
Well, this is, in my opinion, that is not Prop 1A compliant, and that's why I've now implemented some actions since our last meeting, because I need to do some further analysis of the engineering interpretation of Prop 1A. And this is the interpretation by which we as a team have been working for the last years since Prop 1A was put into place. For instance, in Prop 1A, there are various issues which need such legal interpretation, but in particular the one I would like to just point out to you is a clarification regarding interpretation of 2704.09E, which says that it's necessary to carry, which is necessary to carry this blended system any further. That is, I've requested written advice from the AG's office about this, what they call transition or bypass requirement of stations. We discussed it at the last meeting, if you recall, which I see as a critical point to be able to meet the blended solution. Again, Prop 1A calls for this capability to transition intermediate stations or to bypass these stations at mainline operating speeds. Now, a person that comes from the industry like myself understands what the intent is of that clause. And that is that when high-speed trains, they should have the ability to transition a stationary train when parked in a station, so that you can ensure that the high-speed train service is not negatively impacted under these conditions. And this is standard design for criteria for high-speed rail systems around the world, and to ensure the safe, correct, optimal, efficient, reliable transportation system. And I believe that this has been put into Prop 1A as a condition because it's a logical condition, it's a logical design parameter for a high-speed rail system. To do that on the Peninsula would require a tremendous amount of work because it more or less means that you have to put 4 tracks in the stations, and as you know, there are 26 stations or something along the corridor. And therefore, that is just one of various of these things that I'm at the moment having the AG's office look at and give me, because finally we need to get Prop 1A bond funding. And of course, I also have to consult with my FRA colleagues, because the other part of the funding, as I mentioned to yourselves, and in particular on the request of Senator Lowenthal last time, we're talking about $18 billion of federal funding. So it also has to meet the federal requirements. And I know that they're also looking at Prop 1A because they say the two should match each other. So this is typically one that we have to really look at, because I do not believe that we're going to meet that if we do a blended system. And of course, the other one, Senator, that we did discuss the last time as well, it's not necessarily Prop 1 related, but it is very important for our consideration. And that is, I have requested Caltrain, and it was in a letter I also submitted to yourself, but I have now requested Caltrain myself to immediately undertake the capacity modeling for the present track configuration, as well as any rather easier bypass alternatives that could happen on the Peninsula. It's important to determine what the capacity is of the today relatively 2-track
Mr. Bernhardt,
solution.
forgive the interruption.
Yeah.
It is important to determine what the capacity is, but after 2 years of requests from the California State Legislature to get ridership numbers that we can believe in have gone unanswered, that one's a little bit hard to take, quite frankly.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, although I would like to slightly differentiate, Senator, between a ridership, and I'm not saying it's not important, and throughput.
Well, let me just make the suggestion that capacity is not unrelated to ridership projections.
I agree.
We're talking about what level of demand is likely to exist, and then what level of capacity exists. The two are inexorably interwoven. And, you know, as I mentioned when Senator Lowenthal was in front of the Transportation Committee earlier this week, you know, this is not simply concern expressed by members of the legislature. This is the peer review group. This is the Institute for Transportation Studies at Berkeley. This is the Legislative Analyst's Office. This is the Inspector General, and this is the Auditor of the State of California. So frankly, I value the capacity estimates that you've referenced. I just wish we were seeing the same commitment to generating ridership projections that the committee and the members of the legislature could rely on.
Senator, in the High-Speed Rail Transportation Committee, at the time chaired by Senator Lowenthal, you recall that I have put together a peer review group for ridership, and I can advise you that if you must have received yesterday, today, whatever, the legislative peer review letter that they sent to you as well, which is a report of their last meeting with me or with us on was April the 1st. They have agreed that what we are doing to ensure that the ridership numbers are going to be secure is the right way forward. So I just wanted to say, we are working. I told you that. It's going to be part of the business plan. We are working on securing those numbers. There's no indication whatsoever at the moment that what's been done up to now is fatally flawed. And therefore, I hear you, but there's still a difference between having capacity that means a number of trains and number of passengers. They are linked, but they're linked in both directions.
So your statement today, which in my view, and again, we'll just go back and look at the tape, is different from your statement last week. But your statement today is that that such a system, such a blended system, would not be Prop 1A compliant. Did I hear you correctly?
Correct.
All right. So now, just
that's
to be,
my interpretation, and that's why I'm going for.
And that's why we're having the conversation. That's why we're having the conversation.
That's why I'm going for legal advice. I'm not a lawyer.
We're going to keep having these conversations until we can sort these issues through. But let me just be clear. What that means is that if you said earlier, yes, we have a first phase. Yes, we expect it to take something on the order of a decade. Yes, we expect it to be something on the rough order of $1.5 billion. And so, so what I've heard today is that, as of today, your view is that high-speed rail between San Jose and San Francisco will spend $1.5 billion over the course of a decade to not be compliant with Prop 1A.
No, because we would only.
Well, Mr. Van Ark, that's just what you told us. You said a decade. You said $1.5 billion. You said it wasn't compliant.
No, Senator, because you recall that we said that before we can build anything on the peninsula, we have to get a Prop 1A compliant CEQA clearance.
So your view is that after a decade, you will have spent $1.5 billion for a project which is not Prop 1A compliant, but which is on the path to Prop 1A compliance 25 years out.
Well, it depends on whether you believe it's 25 years, but it's a phased implementation.
Okay, let me try it again because I want us to get this right. So your view is, as of today, that we would spend over the course of a decade $1.5 billion to develop a project which was not Prop 1A compliant, but which was on the path towards Prop 1A compliance over the course of the subsequent 1 to 15 years thereafter.
I believe that the system that we have to build has to be Prop 1A compliant.
By when, sir?
But can be built in phases.
By when does it have to be Prop 1A compliant according to Prop 1A? You have your legal counsel with you. If she wants to weigh in, I'm happy to hear it. But because what I'm hearing is 10 years, $1.5 billion, and as of that date, not yet Prop 1A compliant. And I think what I heard you say is, as of that date, it's not Prop 1A compliant, but that at some point in the future, thank you, that at some point in the future, it might be or the goal would be to have it be Prop 1A compliant. Ms. Aitchison?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Let me just clarify for the record, so I'm quoted appropriately, that I'm the environmental attorney. I'm not the bond expert. But my understanding of Proposition 1A is that it doesn't have timing requirements, save those associated with the funding plan. So that is something that could also be clarified with the folks in my office who are more expert in this arena than I am.
So how do we know if anything is ever Prop 1A compliant if there's never a timing requirement? Just And I don't want to be misunderstood here, so just as last week's discussion shouldn't have led anybody to believe that I thought a single train was a desirable goal, let me be clear that what I'm about to say is to make the point and not to make the suggestion. So does that mean, Ms. Aitchison, that if $1.5 billion is spent over the course of the next decade to do the first phase of the phased implementation, and that is not Prop 1A compliant, which in and of itself, Mr. Van Ark, you've said today, it would not be, that if someone wants to say with a straight face, we'll finish it up 100 years from now, that they can make the case that they're still Prop 1A compliant because there's no time deadline?
I'm not sure I can answer that question specifically. You know, moving out 100 years, the authority is charged with the planning, design, and construction of a high-speed rail system that meets certain design requirements. And those design requirements, you know, being Prop 1A compliant, are what needs to be studied in the environmental document.
But I thought I heard you use the word implementation just now, did I?
Yes, and I apologize. I don't have the statute in front of me, but it's the planning, design, it's either implementation or construction.
Well, let me just say both to legal counsel and to the authority, if, you know, a great deal of attention has been brought to bear on the issue of Prop 1A compliance and the necessity for compliance, and I think that's entirely appropriate, just to be clear. But you kind of can't have that one both ways. I mean, what we're talking about is spending $1.5 billion over the course of a decade for a project you describe as not yet Prop 1A compliant at that time, but then I further hear that there's no clarity about, you know, whether it ever has to get there or whether, you know, there is essentially no deadline for that. Ms. Aitchison, if that's incorrect, please again help get us squared away.
I'll do my best here, and I fear that I'm not going to fully answer your question, and I apologize for that. But the authority has to continue to plan for a Prop 1A compliant system, and that's what it is required to study in its environmental documentation. And I do not believe, now I'm not studying this as I speak to you, but I do not believe in the Bond Act there are specific time requirements for accomplishing that, but that has to remain the authority's position, that it is planning for a system. And so that is something that, again, the folks in our office who are delving into these issues could look at more clearly and more deliberately.
Okay. So I thought that was a helpful and important expression. So that has to continue to be their position, meaning as long as they continue to maintain that that's their end goal, then the issue is moot, really. I mean, what does as long as they continue to maintain that that's their position?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I apologize.
Well, what I heard you say just a minute ago, and forgive me if I don't get the precise 3 or 4 words, is that because there isn't an end date, that as long as the authority has to maintain the position that they will eventually get to Prop 1A compliance. Is that what I heard you? I think that's what I heard you say.
I don't want to hair split here, but what I'm trying to
Not
express...
in my case, you definitely don't, ma'am. So.
What I am trying to express is our view that the authority has a statutory obligation to deliver a system compliant with the statute. Not that it is going to say it's going to, but not do otherwise, but that it has to continue to move toward full compliance with that statute by designing a project that meets the requirements of the statute, which, again, Mr. Van Ark has asked our office to clarify, and I don't want to weigh into specifics. I'm not able to do that here today. But that is their statutory obligation, to deliver a system that's consistent with Proposition 1A.
But is there any deadline at all?
You know, again, I can do my best and look through here, but my best recollection is that there is not.
Okay.
I may be wrong.
Mr. Van Ark, you think that there is no deadline at all?
I believe there's no deadline, and I would just like to correct, of course, I know you used it as an example, the 10 years and 1.5 billion, but of course it's the intent of the authority to build what is necessary to be built, depending on the funding stream. So it's not as if we have the intent of putting in 1.5 billion only in the project but to prepare ourselves for a phased implementation approach.
And I want to get to Mr. Umberg in just a second. I want to let you confer with Mr. Belgiano. But you had on your agenda today, and I didn't hear, help me, did you take it up earlier today, the phased implementation, or is that coming up later in the day?
We did take up the phased implementation with our board, you mean? Yes.
And the phased implementation has what I'm going to call colloquially a first phase.
Phased implementation will have many phases, of which there is always a first phase, yes.
Good.
Yes.
That's good. We can find some common ground on that. And is that the phase that gets us to this $1.5 billion number that's in the ballpark? Okay.
The phase, what we've asked the board for is that they give us the go-ahead to start the work on looking at phased implementation. So I can't tell you if it's $1.5 billion or maybe it's $4 billion, but we're having to look at logical sequencing of the work that'll, over time, give us more and more capacity and not block any developments. I gave you the example the last time of a house. If you build a house with a basement, you've got to put the basement in first before you build a house on top of it. So these are the things that...
And I gave you the example of the 400-unit apartment project, which could come in two phases of 200 units, or you could just decide, you know what, 200 units is all we're going to build, and therefore that's all we're going to do an EIR on. And I think where we are is in the conversation about whether or not we're ever going to see the additional units or the additional phases. And let me ask the question this way. How long and how much does it take to get the phase up and get the project up and running to the level that you have described in previous hearings of using high-speed rail authority trains running on an upgraded Caltrain? Because you have said that is consistent with your phased approach.
We do not have the figure, Senator. Again, that is what we requested the board to further investigate today. That is the next phase. I explained to you the last time that the decision to put the Arrow money into the Central Valley was a recent decision. Then at our previous board meeting, we launched the idea of phased implementation, and we're going to be looking at phased implementation on this particular section of the alignment as well as on the section from LA to Anaheim.
Thank you. Mr. Umberg, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Senator. I'm reluctant to enter the fray, but you've asked a very important question. The question is with respect to what are the time parameters? I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know it's an important question that you should know and we should know. And so rather than, for example, having an answer provided here as we sit, I would just ask that we be given time to study that, and maybe you want to study it as well, your staff, so that we can come to a common understanding, because if we don't have a common understanding, it's going to create additional challenges, I think, for quite some time. So that would be my request.
Yeah. Let me. That's fine. We'll take the time to look. Let me say I'm disappointed in today's conversation. I thought we made some real progress last week, and what I hear today is essentially a backtracking on that conversation, and I think that's unfortunate. And we'll pick it up next time. Let me just say, Mr. Van Ark, I'm sure from your staff, and I suspect that your authority members know, we had a bill that we heard in this very committee that Senator LaMalfa offered to just essentially turn off the funding spigot for high-speed rail. I voted against that measure earlier this week. Senator Lowenthal voted against that measure as a member of the Transportation and Housing Committee earlier this week. Because we both said that we continue to support high-speed rail done right, and we've both tried to define what that might look like. But if the authority persists in pursuing an approach which involves 60-foot viaducts up and down the peninsula from San Francisco to San Jose, which involves, without the consent and desire of local communities, Mr. Van Ark, to give you that point, to push itself outside the boundaries of the existing Caltrain right-of-way, and to pursue a EIR for a project which may never get built, in my judgment probably shouldn't get built, and for which ridership studies, frankly, are unpersuasive, and that essentially leaves a sword over the head of the businesses and residents up and down that 50-foot corridor, then I'm going to be pretty hard-pressed to support that effort going forward. So I want to encourage you today to try and find again that common ground that we started to find last week. Because, as I say, I thought last week was a good step forward, and I think today is a step back on that front. Senator Lowenthal?
Yeah, I have a number of questions I'd like to.
Please. Senator Lowenthal, I also just,
Yes,
I apologize because I just, this one more thought. Yes, it's about all of those things, but if we're looking at an order of magnitude, back to Senator Fuller's point earlier today, of $1.5 billion versus $6 billion, rough order of magnitude, Senator Fuller, the response that you got earlier today from Mr. Van Ark on your issue and why the evaluation of an alternate route was because it, quote, will save us a huge amount of money, end quote. Well, $4.5 billion, the difference between $1.5 billion and $6 billion, is a huge amount of money as well. And if we can create a blended system that integrates high-speed rail with a 21st century Caltrain up and down this corridor and save $4.5 billion that we don't have, it seems to me that would be worth pursuing with equal vigor.
Senator, if I may, I agree. We agree with that. The thing is, as I mentioned to Senator Fuller, I mean, the alternative going down the Grapevine will meet Prop 1A. And as we agreed at the last meeting, and when you closed at the last meeting, you said that we must meet Prop 1A. I mean, we have agreement that we need to meet Prop 1A. I'm trying to get legal advice on certain parameters of Prop 1A as to whether we're meeting those, and getting some advice on capacity planning, which is whether the ridership is right or wrong. Capacity planning just means, can I get a train in there or not? That's really the question.
I think it's one thing to say...
Then we can move forward on this issue.
I think it's one thing to say we need to meet Prop 1A. I think it's another to use Prop 1A as the vehicle by which you avoid addressing legitimate concerns raised up and down the state. And if Prop 1A continues to be the vehicle by which the authority avoids coming to grips with those legitimate concerns, then you may see legislative action as a necessary consequence, either to deal with the matter statutorily or to place a revision on the ballot. And let me just say, that doesn't help your interest in terms of moving the project forward. People came and testified against the Lowenthal bill, suggesting that it was problematic, and I thought there was even a hint that it was inappropriate of the senator to introduce his bill because it might chill the environment in which we move forward. Great. If you don't want to see that kind of action, then we need you to step up and start solving problems and not putting more impediments in the way of people who are trying to get to yes with you. Senator Lowenthal.
Thank you. What struck me, the reason I'm following up these questions now rather than earlier is because just as this meeting began, and during this meeting, which I have not, I received a 6-page letter that was sent, CC'd to my office, that was sent to you regarding the peer review committee. So I haven't had a chance to read it, so I may ask questions that are in this. This just arrived as we're speaking. But I have some issues because we've been asking about this. You do recall the letter that Senator Steinberg, let me just make sure, that Senator Steinberg, Senator Simitian, Senator DeSaulnier and I wrote to you regarding you included in the next business plan important questions about the project. You recall that?
Yes.
And you also recall that in March, I think it's the 22nd of March, you responded to the questions we raised as, I believe the quote was, these are the right ones that must be answered by the authority, right? And I think that the questions that were originally raised by the peer review group and maybe responded in this letter, I'm not sure because we haven't had a chance to read this letter, are those right ones? Is that not so? So we're talking about the questions and that these are the right questions, right?
My recollection, Senator, is the first letter you referenced that came from the senators to the authority requested that those issues that the peer review group queried should be incorporated in the business plan.
That's right. And you responded, those are the right questions, right?
Correct.
So that's really what I'm
saying. And you are correct with your second statement too, and I too only received this report yesterday.
So I'm going to ask you questions that may also be in this, but I've been planning on this.
So the report apparently, although I looked very quickly at it, that we received yesterday from the peer review group, the new report, references the same points as the last one.
Right.
But it, of course, is an update of the last one.
Right, and we haven't
because they have had a subsequent meeting with us.
Right,
yes,
and
exactly.
that's really what I want to understand. First, the questions, what that process is. What is, with a description of your current process for reviewing these questions that are outlined in the letter. Do you meet regularly with the peer review? It'd be really helpful for us to understand what the process is, how you're going to, how you are planning to review the questions that we raised in the peer review, for us to understand what is the authorities going, how are they going to review and deal with these issues is the first question.
Well, as you know, the peer review group is a legislative peer review group, so they were appointed by yourselves, and they do not report to us. They have the choice and decision as to when they want to have meetings with us. And we have had 2 official meetings with the peer review group, the second being on the 1st of April. They are full-day meetings. They do full-day, you can say, audits of the project status. I find them to be very constructive. I find that the members that have been chosen for the peer review group as being very capable and professional people. Unfortunately, not all the positions have been filled.
Right, we know that.
But on the other hand, I think the people are very knowledgeable about the type of business that we're involved in here.
I don't believe all of the members even have been able to meet with you, the ones that have.
Not all at the same time.
That's
you're
right.
Yes.
That's right.
But still, I really appreciate that team, and I also really would like you to read the report, because they are. I know you are going to do it.
We are going to read it, but it's very hard as the report arrives, as we're having this conversation.
And even I haven't, because it just arrived yesterday.
Absolutely, and we will, because that's the question. Because really, there are
serious issues in there, related to issues like staffing, as you know, like things that we have to resolve, and we are busy resolving.
Could you share with us a little bit what are the key issues that so far have been raised, and what's next, and how you're, I understand we didn't ask you to do this, but it would be very helpful for us to understand how that process and what are the issues in your meetings have been raised, and how are they being addressed, and what information can you provide to us about that?
I think the one main concern that's number one, and was number one on the last report from the peer review too, was the level of staffing of the authority. I reported at the last meeting, you asked me about that. We have 19 people today. Of the 19 people, I'm more or less the only one with experience in a mega project of this type. And if you want to do not outreach, if you want to do oversight and management of a project of this type, you need many more people with that experience.
What about some of the other issues that were raised in terms of the business plan, the financial plan?
On the business plan,
have you begun to address those?
Yes.
Those are critical issues for us to understand where they are.
On the business plan, you'll see some positive statements made regarding the business plan. They are aware of the fact that the business plan is due on the 14th of October. But we did discuss with them aspects of the business plan.
And they will be included in that business plan, some of the review,
yes,
the statements?
Yes. But we have, to be really honest with you, we are very much on the same page with respect to what the business plan, what the direction should be on a project like this. And again, I say the people that are on the peer review group are people that have built these type of projects before and have had that type of experience.
So you would describe, so if you're on the same page, that your relationship with the peer review committee is one of constructive dialogue between
constructive dialogue, tough, hard, straight, but really
Any
good.
tough issues that have come up that really have not been, that we need to hear about? And just preliminarily, in a preliminary form, I realize that we're asking you to give us by October some of the business plan, which I'm sure will include some of this interaction between the business.
I think there are a few issues. One I mentioned, and that is that
the staffing.
The staffing. The other one is that they feel that what we've done to ensure the stability and the correctness of the ridership numbers is the right way forward, and that the organization and the peer panel that we selected was the right type of way to do this type, to do that for a mega project of this type. I believe they were a bit critical on the implementation of some risk management that we need to do between now and beginning of construction. But all in all, you would do best to look at both reports, the previous one and this one, and see the the enhancement and the move forward.
As the project is unfolding, as we're learning more about it, as we're learning more about the funding, as you work on this on the business plan, which you will try to respond. I think these questions will be hopefully answered in October 1. You must be learning much more about the kinds of public-private partnerships that may be involved, because as we all know, that term encompasses a huge range, and it's going to be very important for us in the legislature to kind of understand what that really means, what it means in terms of decisions that are going to be made by the High-Speed Rail Authority. We talked about some changes up here in terms of alignment of questions. I'm sure that public-private partnership may also, by its very nature, as we understand it, not because of anybody's, will change some things also. And it's really critical that we understand how that unfolds.
Just that you're aware of it, we had the RFEI conference. I think I've mentioned to you that before. We had about 2,000 companies involved in this request for expression of interest. But we also had 22 groups of investors and serious groups that want to be part of this project as investors, as operators, as concessionaires. I had a big group in my office this week, 2 days ago, from Spain, the biggest basically in the world in this type of thing. They fund many American projects, but they also fund many European projects and get involved in them from an infrastructure development and funding point of view. There are quite a few. We've had meetings after the RFEI, and we continue to have meetings with these groups now as part of the business case. But let me also remind you, because I told you that last time, Senator, the peer review group also makes mention of the fact, of course, that federal funding is very important.
Absolutely, as we do.
Federal funding is one of the big aspects of this particular project.
And will determine also in part what kind of partnership you develop also.
Exactly.
I think that's really what and this is not a criticism of anybody. We're in a very loosey-goosey world at this moment in terms of knowing what types of commitments are out there, and that will have not only in terms of issues around compliance with 1A, but also how we move forward, and we just would like to make sure that whatever occurs in the business plan, the questions that we have asked you will be included in the but some of these other issues also in terms of where will be, because it's critical that we know, and that is not a criticism. That is just to say that's the world we live in, and we need to have these answers so that we can be responsible for the oversight that we must do.
It's very important to work together with these probable future investors, because it is a big part of it, and they want to have. We have to prepare our project in a way that they will be the investors of the future in this project. But one of the biggest investors we must not underestimate, and I think we are aiming to build this system for the people of California. The people of California voted for it. But the biggest investor in this particular project is the DOT. And I think that you and we together should be working on the DOT to make sure
could not
that they
agree more
continue,
that there has to be a concerted effort, and we have to work together between the state of California, the legislature, the authority together to address our Department of Transportation and others in both in the administration and in the Congress regarding where we are. Without that, we're just left with this tremendous question mark that's out there.
I agree.
And it's important, imperative that we do that together. I also just have, so I'm glad to hear that these questions will be addressed in the business plan, that you are working with the authority, that you have had workshops with the peer review group. But I want to raise a question that came up, just struck me as it came up earlier, in relationship to the question I asked you about building an interim terminal versus the Transbay terminal. And then, didn't think about this until we had this discussion here about being compliant with 1A. Is building an interim terminal compliant with 1A?
No, because once again, it's not that we're building an interim. Everything we'll be building in phases is interim. The Fourth and Kings is in any case a overflow station for Transbay Terminal. So it is nominated that by Transbay Terminal as well.
So the people at Transbay say, okay, go on.
So Fourth and Kings is today already a station. It is a Caltrain station today.
So what you're saying is that in this discussion about what is compliant with 1A and that you're really bound by 1A, you're saying that designing this
in phases.
Well, not only in phases, but spending which we don't know, a significant amount of money, which could be used for the Transbay terminal, which you're now spending on someplace else, is compliant with 1A?
It's part of what we need to build at the end of the day.
I'd like to ask the attorney, is that compliant with 1A? That was never in the 1A.
I'm sorry, whether a station at Fourth and King is compliant with 1A?
With 1A, when in fact, and we're not doing the build out to the Transbay terminal, which was what was in Proposition 1A.
Well, let me just clarify.
And we're spending the money for that could be spent on 1A. I mean, could be spent on Transbay.
The Transbay terminal is identified in the proposition
Absolutely.
as the northernmost terminus. Right. And with other stations along the alignment, the authority has discretion over to have a station or not have a station. And so I would hesitate to say not Prop 1A compliant in that it may be one of the stations along the way.
No, we're not talking about as one of the stations along the way.
But to the exclusion of Transbay, again, speaking preliminarily would strike me as problematic.
I would like to hear a discussion from the Attorney General, on that issue.
Let me, it's rare that I would presume to speak for Mr. Van Ark, but let me see if I can't try and get us to yes on this one. Based on the earlier conversation we had today, Mr. Van Ark, I think your team would say that Fourth and King is on the path to compliance with Proposition 1A. And I think that's what your legal counsel was trying to clarify earlier. And I think that's been your position today with respect to some of the other improvements that we've talked about. Yeah. And so it's on the path to compliance, I think, is the...
It's a new term, the path to compliance.
Yes, that's well. For the record, I'm not one of the consultants to the authority, however, that's so...
We're always looking for good people.
So, thank you. Senator Lowenthal?
No, I'm just concerned that, we spend a lot of time talking about what's compliant with 1A and what's not, and I just need to understand whether these actions are compliant or whether they're on the path to compliance or they're maybe compliant.
I think Mr. Umberg counseled us wisely earlier, which is we really do sort of need to figure out what the time frame, horizon constraints are and focus in on that a little bit because, if there is no outer boundary to the project, that creates a lot of ambiguity, I think, and some interesting challenges. So.
And in conclusion, I will say that when you do return, it would be interesting to talk about the letter from the peer review since we haven't had a chance really to read that. And so that'll be...
Senator, just that you understand, or Chairman, Senator, you asked me last week, we were going to be presenting phase implementation at the board. You asked me whether there were going to be big decisions made, and I told you that was not the idea. So we presented it to the board today, but obviously with what's been in the press and what's been heard and what's been seen with respect to the difference between blended system and phased implementation, our board too has requested that we come back to them in a month's time to explain to them what we want to do, because it's clear that the board's also saying we don't want to spend money on something until we get clarity on it. So we have to get back to the board in a month's time, and in the meanwhile hold back, obviously clarifying with some of these issues that we're looking at, legal issues, capacity issues and so on, and that we will be going back to our board as well, with the aim that we have some clarity then as to what the engineer should start working on.
Great. Let me, Mr. Balganorth, you've been silent, and that may have been by design, but I want to make sure that we didn't cut you out of the conversation. If you have observations you want to share before we wrap this up and let you get back to your business.
You really didn't cut me out of the conversation, but I do appreciate that. As a new board member, I'd just like to say one thing. It's my goal, and from what I can understand from everybody else there, to get this thing done in a expeditious manner that is both economical and in compliance with 1A. I think that it's, as I have expressed to you in the past and continue to express to you, we have and I think most people on the board feel the same way, we want to build a system that benefits California, but we want to do it in a way that it's not great detriment to any community. So we're very interested, or at least I'm very interested in everything that you have to say about this, but I'm also interested in trying to come to a resolution that will move this along.
I am going to take public testimony in a minute. I'm going to ask folks to be mindful of the time constraints we're operating under for our entire calendar. That being said, I know a lot of folks put themselves to great effort to be here, so I want to try and respect that. Before we let folks step away from the table, Senator Lowenthal.
Yeah, I just want to make one
comments,
statement
please.
that following up what I asked you about the peer review, that next Wednesday, I believe it's May 13th? No. 11th is Wednesday? If that's what it is, I believe at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 or 1:30 in the, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Senate Select Committee on High-Speed Rail will be reviewing the Kempton, the peer review report, and so we're going to have a discussion of that. And so the questions, we'll get a chance to review this also, and we will have Mr. Kempton there and to follow up on doing the peer review. So I just want to mention that.
All right,
and
so
invite
that's
everyone to come.
May the 11th, that's 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock,
That's
peer
the Senate
review,
Select Committee on High-Speed Rail. All right. And we'll be back again next week in this budget subcommittee, looking forward to picking up the conversation a little further and focusing on some of these time constraint issues. Let me express a concern and then try and end on an upbeat note, if I can. I am disappointed that, in my judgment, Mr. Van Ark, the position you laid out today is a step back from where we were last week. We'll revisit what got said last week, and we'll see to what extent we can reconcile that. That being said, I appreciate the efforts that all three of you gentlemen made to be here with us today, as well as Ms. Aitchison, your legal counsel. And I think it's, as the conversation today with all three members of the committee suggests, there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of questions to be answered if this thing is going to move forward, as Mr. Balganorth suggests. So thank you for being here. Ms. Aitchison, thank you. I think under challenging circumstances, you continue to represent your client quite well while still responding to the questions from the committee. No small accomplishment, so good for you. I am delighted that we're going to be able to get an outreach plan for the region that is represented by Senator Fuller and other members. I know Senator Rubio's had concerns about the same set of issues, and I'm sure there are others in your region. So I think that will be helpful to everyone. And let me just say, and please share, these are my sentiments at least, with your board. I thought it was both a wise and appropriate response on the phased plan that was on your agenda today to say, let's hold off on that for a month while we have some further conversation between and among the parties. I think, call me an optimist, but I continue to believe if we keep hashing these issues out, that we may get to yes one day, and hopefully sooner rather than later. So then on that, let me just say thank you again, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you. Take care. Public testimony is appropriate this time, so if there are folks who want to comment on the high-speed rail issues that we've just heard about, obviously we're not going to be able to do a back and forth. That's not the intention, but if you're here and you care enough to come, we want to be sure we hear from you on these issues. Come on up and just take a seat at the table.
Am I the only one brave enough?
No, that's all right. This is... Thanks.
My name is Stacy Mortensen. I'm from San Joaquin County. I also
Ms. Mortensen, I need to ask you to pull the mic. There you go. It's up. Now that it's lit, it's on, so you're good.
I'm from San Joaquin County. I also oversee a rail service. I understand that our state is in a very dire economic situation, and we feel that all up and down the valley. But looking at the long view, I do see this infrastructure and this program as a way to leverage investment into California. And I think if we are going to spend money, we should spend it where it does some good and pulls in money from outside places. I also think it has a chance to leverage new industry into California, and we're bleeding industries. And I think it can't be understated that this has the opportunity to sprout up something completely new. With that said, I do appreciate as a taxpayer your hard-hitting questions to make sure this thing is done right. And on the flip side, as someone who has built something brand new, I can sympathize with the authority about answers not being known right out the gate and the environmental process needing to drag on before some of those things come to a close. So I think I can sympathize on both sides of the table, but I appreciate that you stay with it and that you allow us to support the authority in their efforts. And on the matter of public outreach, we have found that it's important to have a convener at the local level that gets both the pros and the cons on the table. It's unrealistic to expect a large state body could drive this information down to the locals like we need it to be. For us, it's farmers and water districts and tribal lands. The state is not capable at that level to really get that conversation going. And so I would encourage that convener agencies in each of the sections be designated and worked with. I mean, if we want this to work for us, we're going to have to put something on the table to try to make sure it does and get that conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Folks, the last witness did a very nice job of limiting herself to about 2 minutes. If we could ask you to do the same. And the encouragement I always give is if you have a single topic sentence that you can start with, if you remember topic sentence from high school English, that says, here is my topic sentence, what's the one thing you want to make sure that all three of us register from your testimony? That's often a helpful way to get there. Sir, you're next.
Yes. Good afternoon. Charles Volz. I'm from Burlingame. I'm a member of the CCHSR board, a retired attorney, and I want to commend the committee for trying to discuss and resolve the macro issues, the global issues statewide. But part of that was the comment from the new board member who said they don't want to do anything that's a detriment to any community, because ultimately for many communities along the right-of-way, what really counts is what impact it has on their community. And for Burlingame, there is strong opposition to an elevated viaduct. In my neighborhood, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of signs in people's front lawn that say, here comes high-speed rail, there goes my neighborhood, because they are afraid of an elevated train freeway that will be as wide as the Dumbarton Bridge going through our very sensitive commercial, residential, and beautifully tree-filled railways. Now, the disappointment I feel relates to the statement of Mr. Van Ork that said, well, there are some communities that want a viaduct, and we can all respect that, but we don't get the flip side that says where there is strong opposition to it, we're going to find another solution, although that was what the board member indicated would be the policy of the board. So I encourage this committee to address that in terms of what is the EIR going to do moving forward. Will it incorporate the three elements that your group with your colleagues has put forward? And I hope that will be the case, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next witness. Sir.
I'm David Schoenbrunn with Transdev. We're a party in the litigation with the authority. My topic sentence is we want to ask you to zero out funding for environmental and engineering work until there is a franchisee in place. This would provide the authority with the appropriate impetus to essentially get themselves focused on the people that they apparently met with this week and get somebody signed up who's willing to undertake this project and undertake the ridership risk. We believe that they probably will want to design their own route and certainly will insist on doing their own ridership studies. So we don't think it makes any sense for the state to continue putting money into Now they're starting to review alternatives that were eliminated for political or nefarious reasons earlier, and are being because of the finance are now starting to study again. That's good, but it ought to be that study ought to be done by an entity that is going to undertake the ridership risk. Okay. And I want to caution you about the politically challenging decision ahead, where you will all be asked to commit bond funds to a major Central Valley construction project. In the absence of a franchisee, we believe this project would be a massive waste of the state's scarce resources, because there literally would be no hope of ever building a system to connect it to. A train to nowhere would be a massive embarrassment to every legislator that authorized the expenditure of bond funds. We urge you in the future, when this does come up, and we saw those same forces testify against the LaMalfa bill, SB 22, we urge you to stand up to that throng of voices that will want the money spent and don't care whether it benefits the state or not. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next witness.
Mike Brady. I'm an attorney from Menlo Park. Blended implementation will not comply with Proposition 1A. You are now touching on one of the central issues. The FRA required the authority to go over to the Central Valley and start the project there. That was absolutely required. What are they going to do? They're going to have a conventional Amtrak system without electrification. Electricity is required under Proposition 1A. No positive train control system, conventional locomotives and cars. That does not comply with what the voters and what the legislature intended. We do not want an interim system. The people of California voted for a high-speed train system. The path to compliance will not work. The journey must be completed, meaning in the Central Valley.
Sir, if you could just lower your voice just a little bit.
Surely.
Thank you.
In the Central Valley, they've got to complete a high-speed train system, and they can't start any place else in California until they complete it there. That's the least of what California expects. The LAO in the early days of these hearings said, no financial risk to the state. If you allow them to start in more than one place, serious financial risk to the state. But the planned implementation and the blended approach have to compliance, not comply with Prop 1A.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Chairman, members, thank you for the time to speak to you today. Daniel Kraus, Californians for High Speed Rail. I just wanted to touch on a couple points during this conversation. I actually, with all due respect, felt it was a little bit unfair to the authority and Mr. Van Ark. I just thought, given the fact that I believe and my organization believes the blended Caltrain high-speed rail approach actually doesn't meet Prop 1A, I really think the onus is on the sponsors of this proposal to prove or demonstrate, that it works.
Mr. Kraus, I'm going to stop you. I'm going to give you your full 2 minutes. In general, it's not my inclination to respond to public testimony, because I think you all ought to get the last word, and I'm going to give you the last word. But I want to be very clear on this. I waited 2+ years to get a plan from the High Speed Rail Authority that could be characterized as high-speed rail done right. I made that call quite clearly and quite specifically quite some time ago. And with the passage of time, nothing came forward. It is not the job description of any member of this committee to design high-speed rail. But finally, in the absence of any real counter offer from the folks at High Speed Rail, your patience just runs out, and you have to say to folks, look, as a state senator, a state assembly member, and a member of Congress representing collectively probably 1.5 million different people, here are some parameters that we think describe what high-speed rail done right looks like, because after the passage of time, nothing's forthcoming. So I understand now that the easy thing for people to do is say, well, we want you to design the project for us. That's not going to happen. What we're going to say is, this is what high-speed rail done right looks like. And we hope the High Speed Rail Authority will now come back to us with a description of a project that fits those parameters. And I'm going to give you the last word because I think that's your right as a member of the public, but I do just want to be very clear about this. We stayed back quite a long ways for quite a long time. And I tried as one locally elected official to be an honest broker the way I gather my colleagues are trying to do in their areas and foster that discussion that the earliest speaker thought was important, because I thought, you know what, let's see if we can't get the conversation going. In my district, 15 months ago, in January of 2010, I convened an informational hearing which drew 500 people on a rainy night. And yet, with the passage of time, no response. So I hope you'll understand if I feel like I've been more than patient and more to the point that my constituents and the constituents of other members have been more than patient, and that at some point, when you see no change in direction, you simply are obliged to say, well, let us help provide some parameters for a restart, a new conversation. That's what we've tried to do. But I don't intend to be, you know, as people have been reminding me lately, we have some other challenges here in the state of California. Designing high-speed rail can't be my job description, but what I can and think I do have to do is provide a framework for that discussion to be more productive than it has been over the last couple of years. Go right ahead, sir. And
thank you.
And just for the record, no, my comments don't count against your time, so not to worry.
Thank you. And I wasn't actually, just to clarify, I don't want to suggest that it's your job to design the high-speed project. That's obviously not something anybody should. It's not your role. So I guess what I was trying to get at is we're concerned as an organization about the parameters and to make sure that the parameters work, and so hopefully there's enough flexibility in this discussion so that maybe if the parameters are determined not to be feasible with Prop 1A, that we can negotiate and work the parameters out so it is workable. And also the phasing issue, we're really concerned about making sure that if phasing makes sense, that it's on the table. And we're a little concerned about the proposals kind of not wanting phasing whatsoever. So that's our main concern. And we're also, you know, maybe it makes sense to take a step back and give the discussion more time to figure out these issues versus trying to get them all defined within the next month or something like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Hi, I'm Nadia Nayak from CARD, which is Californians Advocating Responsible Rail Design. For those who are not familiar, CARD is a grassroots volunteer organization that's been following the project. My topic sentence, I sort of have two. A blended system is good, and service plans drive infrastructure, so please require the authority to come up with a service plan. Since the announcement by Congresswoman Eshoo, Senator Simitian, and Assemblymember Gordon, we've been meeting with several rail experts on the feasibility of blended
systems. If I could ask you to slow down just a little bit, and I promise I'll give you an extra 15 seconds so we can follow what you're saying.
Thank you. Sorry, it's been a long drive. Based on our discussions, the proposal by Peninsula legislators is not only feasible but desirable. I know this committee and most of the people following this issue understand the importance of a reliable ridership study. Equally important, but not as well known as ridership, is the mantra that service plan drives infrastructure. The key to building good infrastructure is having a plan of what type of service is expected to run. The expected service plan determines things like how often trains run, the types of trains, where main stations will be, and even the type of parking that should be available at stations. A service plan is absolutely necessary. Unfortunately, the authority continues to put off the decision to bring in foreign operators that could shed light on the types of service plans that could be profitable. Without a service plan, we have a case of the tail wagging the dog, and this is no Chihuahua. We commend the legislators for taking a leadership position on this issue. Blended systems will affect not just the peninsula, but also the LA area and potentially save billions of dollars of unnecessary infrastructure costs. You're doing the right thing by trying to get the budget down to a reasonable amount so you can find the money to do things like Trans Bay and get to the LA Basin. We'd like to recommend that going forward you consider requiring service plans from the authority as part of their planning process to ensure we don't overbuild and waste taxpayer dollars. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Gentlemen, I'm not sure who's next, but I think the fellow with the microphone will probably be first, and then he'll hand it to the fellow who doesn't have the microphone.
Okay.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Roland LeBrun. I have no affiliation. I'd like to touch on a couple of topics. That's Trans Bay and ridership. On the subject of Trans Bay, I noticed with interest that the authority selected top tunneling expert with, worldwide reputation for the analysis of the tunnels in the Grapevine and I-5 area. And it would make sense to me to engage the same consultants to look at the tunnels between 4th and King and Trans Bay. Mr. Von Ark quoted, I believe, $2.5 billion this morning to do what is essentially, I think, is 1.3 miles of tunnels. I believe these people could possibly save you between $1 billion and $2 billion. That's my first suggestion. On the subject of ridership, since we don't have any numbers, I thought it might be useful to actually look at high-speed rail traffic in Europe, specifically between London and Paris as an example, and assume that London is St. Pancras is Trans Bay and Paris is LA, for instance. Currently, they're running 16.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to smile or interrupt you. You got some smiles with the comparisons.
I'm just making an assumption because these are numbers that I know I'm comfortable with. Okay, so we're looking at 16 trains in each direction a day. Okay, they're 60% full, so you're talking about 10,000 people going in each direction, right? Now, the same line also accumulates the trains to Brussels. I don't know how full they are. Based on what I know of Zaventem, they're probably fairly full. That's 10 trains in each direction. But that's only 25% of the capacity on that line, because the other 75% plus are used by commuter rail. And the basic problem we have with the High-Speed Rail Authority in terms of the shared alignment is that they have assumed that Caltrain would be carry on using the existing stock, and that's not at all what happened there. And the solution there has to be at looking at the kind of rolling stock that you're going to need to be able to achieve this. And one last point of all those, so the London to Brussels, London to Paris, and the commuter rail, all that stock is privately operated. And one very last point, the consultants I mentioned for the tunnels were also behind this entire operation of sharing real long-distance high-speed rail with commuter rail. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next witness, please.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Henry Perea. I'm a supervisor in Fresno County, co-chair of Fresno Works, working on high-speed rail in Fresno County and the Valley. My topic statement would be, we'll start off with, without vision, we're done. I'm paraphrasing that one. But really, I think...
Is the correct quote, where there is no vision, the people perish?
That's correct,
Thank
sir.
You. Just,
yeah. I just want to bring it, I wanted to bring it to modern day language.
All right, thank you.
How about without no ridership?
Well, let's talk about that. And what I'm asking the state legislature and the governor to do is to carry through on the vision of the people of California who voted for this proposition and said we want high-speed rail. Now, we all know that the economic model for this was never to be 100% taxpayer funded, combination of state, federal, local, and investment. We all know that. What I can tell you, having made a decision by the authority in selecting Fresno to, or just south Madera, to Bakersfield for this leg of construction, has brought significant international interest to Fresno. I can't tell you how many countries we have hosted already in our community, giving them tours of the site, how much investment they're already talking about doing in the San Joaquin Valley, the types of land they're looking at to buy, and the billions of dollars they are specifically talking about investing in the next 6 to 9 months in this project. So is high-speed rail real? Absolutely, it's real. You know, there's an investment that's been made. The ground will be broken in the San Joaquin Valley next year. And when folks say it's a train to nowhere, you know, I kind of point you back to, you know, the Hoover Dam or any major infrastructure project in this country that we've seen. The day they built it, they didn't have every penny in the bank to build it, and they didn't finish it the next day. It's built in phases, just as high-speed rail will be built. So we're asking you, and if I understood the peer review committee correctly, that's a good idea. You know, there's no question that there are issues that you all have, and they need to be answered. There's a lot of communities that have questions in such a major infrastructure project. Those are legitimate questions that have to be dealt with, and I believe those will be bridged. Mr. Van Ark and his crew has been here for a short period of time. I get what you're saying about 2 years or more, because I think at that time people just weren't seeing the reality of it. But it's real now, and I think people are doing catch-up, and you deserve your answers, and I hope you get them. But the bottom line is this project needs to happen for California. I don't have to tell you about your budget or my budget and what we're dealing with and the cuts we're going to have to make, and there's not a lot on the horizon that's going to talk about economic benefit for this state. We need to put people back to work, and that's what we need your help in. And if we're seeing international investment coming down the pike and coming soon, then I think the questions of ridership and all that will be answered. Because obviously these aren't dumb people. They're not putting down their money because there's not a project here. So stay the course.
Thank you very much for your comments. Let's go from one side to the other with the remaining witnesses.
Mr. Chairman and Senators, thanks very much for giving us this time for the public to comment. I'm Gary Patton. I've written you a letter, which I don't have to rehearse here. I wanted you to take, and I still want you to take, a rather bolder approach to trying to do it right in California. I think the current direction is not going to get you there, and you really need to look at something like what Mr. Schonbrun was talking about, getting a real knowledgeable group in here to help the state plan and design and then implement ultimately, consistent with Prop 1A, a good system. I have another comment, which really, and the reason I got up here is to follow on the chairman's comments. AB 3034, which became Proposition 1A, started out through the legislature with everything going to the authority, all the money going to the authority, and the authority just making the decisions themselves, using their best judgment consistent with the proposition. The legislature changed that, and the people ratified what the legislature did. It put the legislature in charge of the project. You should not be apologetic. Certainly, you shouldn't be trying to plan the project in the subcommittee, but you should not be apologetic about demanding something that, from the legislative perspective, is done right financially and environmentally and for the benefit of the communities and for good transportation policy. Senator Simitian, the people that I'm working with closely on the peninsula, applaud what you and Mr. Gordon and Anna Eshoo have laid out as a kind of minimum standard. Unless the community really wants it, you don't drive some high freeway-like elevated viaduct structure through the middle of their communities, and you stay within the existing right-of-way. And I think the committee and the subcommittee here should give that sort of as the direction to the High-Speed Rail Authority, as long as they're still in charge of the project, and tell them, look, you bring us something like that because we feel comfortable about funding that in this segment. And I think other senators in their areas need to take the same kind of approach, given to who you're working with.
Thank you very much. And thanks for staying within that couple-minute time frame.
Hi, this is Kathy Hamilton. I'm with CCHSR. I attended the meeting this morning at the High-Speed Rail Authority, and Mr. Van Ark did say that the board decided to put off any discussion on the San Jose-San Francisco route until later. But what he didn't tell you was that they were concerned that this was smoke and mirrors to fund Caltrain, and they are also going to ask for a Attorney General's opinion on if they can substitute possibly a Phase 2 city for a Phase 1 and sort of, let us off the hook for a while. I just wanted you to know that there was considerable discussion this morning about the motives behind what the proposal initially was. The thing I wanted to tell you was I'm very concerned about this on the path of compliance. I've heard this story before, and I don't think it's what the people wanted in 1A. At what point is compliance going to be the law? The initial building segment, usable segment, they have said that what they're going to begin to construct in the Central Valley is not a usable segment, but they're on their way to get it. They even gave it something, special initials, initial building site or something like that. And that's not what 1A says. I'm also concerned that they'll use that same tactic with revenue guarantees, which is clear as a bell. Well, it isn't clear as a bell, but the fact is this is not the promises that were made to the people were to do a plan that followed the law fiscally and responsibly, and I think you should question this path of compliance because I think it's smoke and mirrors. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And I think this is our final witness, yes?
Yes, and I will be brief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Ravi Mehta appearing on the behalf of the cities of Atherton, Menlo Park, Palo Alto, and Pico Rivera. First, on behalf of our cities, thank you for being stalwart, for the stalwart oversight of the High-Speed Rail Authority, and more importantly, for your fortitude in doing what's right and good for all of the state of California. My topic sentence is ridership. I think you've heard it from others. The High-Speed Rail Authority continues to spend on a daily basis. They continue to change, as they did with the I-5 corridor, on a continual basis. They seem to have lots of money for these changes based on what they believe is right for them. Ridership is the key. The longer we wait, the longer it's going to take. It's going to take about a year, year and a half. I asked this committee to mandate that before they get any funding, that they do a ridership study and that they get started now. Because it is important, because we're continuing to spend millions, if not billions of dollars that may literally be thrown out the door. So that is my topic sentence, and I'd ask this committee to mandate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Any other witnesses on this subject? All right, if not, that completes the topic of high-speed rail for today. All right, thank you. I could see that one coming. Members, we have quite a bit of work left to do. I am going to say let's take just a 5-minute break, and a 5-minute break really does mean a 5-minute break. That's not a legislative standard time 5-minute break. That's a 5-minute break. We will recess for just 5 minutes and be right back. Thank you.
How long are we recessing for?
5 minutes. Thank you for that clarification, Senator.